No one mourned the Viridian Veil at first, because you can't mourn a ghost you don't know is dead. For 3 standard weeks, it was just a communications blackout. The kind of stellar inconvenience that happens when a relay star coughs a little too hard or a void squid chews through a subspace Ansible. The Veil was humanity's quiet backyard. 12 colonies spread across 7 systems, a place people went to be forgotten by the roaring central worlds of the Terran Authority. It was a sector of scientists seeking solitude, farmers chasing virgin soil, and idealists building utopias that always seemed to be one generation away. It was a place of radio whispers, not pronouncements. So when those whispers stopped, only the most dedicated listeners even noticed the silence. I was one of them, but not by choice. My name is Kalen, and I captained the Last Word, which is a poetic name for a ship that picks through the garbage of the galaxy. We're salvagers, the carrion birds of the space lanes, following the scent of disaster and expired contracts. My job put me on the edge of things, listening to the static between the stars for the faint cry of a distress beacon or the telltale energy signature of a ship whose heart had stopped beating. For days, the sector bordering the Veil had been too quiet. The background chatter of shipping lanes and colony broadcasts fading into an unnerving hum. My co-pilot, a grizzled old spacer named Reese, who claimed to have been born on a freighter mid-jump, felt it too. He called it a dead calm, the kind of stillness in the air that comes right before the sky rips itself open. We were working a contract to pull reactor cores from a decommissioned asteroid mine near the Persephone border when the official authority bulletin finally came through. It wasn't a warning. It was a confession of ignorance. All contact with the Viridian Veil sector had been lost. Travel to the region was restricted. All ships were ordered to stand down, and the Authority Navy was assessing the situation. That was the moment the silence turned from an anomaly into a threat. 12 colonies, nearly 4 billion souls, vanished from the galactic conversation without a single cry for help. The authorities' assessment was a farce of caution and bureaucratic paralysis. They sent unmanned probes, sleek silver needles designed to be fast and unseen. None came back. They sent a single stealth frigate, the pride of the fleet, captained by a man whose record was flawless. It broadcast one word back to command before its signal was sheared off from reality empty. Then, nothing. The fear began to curdle into something colder. In the data havens of Mars and the political forums of Earth, theories swarmed like angry wasps. Was it a new weapon from the reptilian Cathar Imperium, a coordinated pirate blitz, a naturally occurring stellar phenomenon, a sort of cosmic silent stroke? No one knew. And the not knowing was a poison that seeped into the heart of humanity. The Veil wasn't just a place. It was a promise. It was the proof that humanity could go out into the great dark and build something peaceful, something better than the crowded, bickering worlds of the Sol system. And now that promise was a 4 billion person question mark. My guild, the Free Salvage Collective, got the call a month after the silence began. The Authority Navy, for all its firepower, was built for fighting wars, not for solving mysteries. They needed scouts who knew how to listen to the dead, who could read the stories told by scarred metal and cold reactors. They needed ships like mine, small, tough vessels packed not with torpedoes, but with deep-range resonance scanners and spectral analyzers that could tell you the last meal a crewman ate from the trace particles in a life support system. The contract was simple and terrifying. Join a preliminary reconnaissance fleet. push into the edge of the veil and find a single piece of debris, a single black box, a single clue that could tell us if we were facing an enemy or an act of God. They didn't offer us money. They offered us answers. And in that moment, answers were the only currency that mattered in the galaxy. The fleet that gathered at the border was a ghost of what the Authority could truly muster. It was a handful of nervous patrol cruisers, a science vessel staffed by hollow-eyed astrophysicists, and 24 salvage ships like mine, our hulls patched and mismatched, looking like a pack of stray dogs waiting to be fed. The flagship commander, Admiral Ava Rostova, a woman with a face carved from granite and a reputation for cold competence, briefed us herself. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but her eyes held the same fear we all felt. "Your job is not to engage," she told us, her image flickering on our bridge view screen. "It is not to rescue. It is to find the beginning of the story. Find us a page one. We will fly in a loose formation. No one jumps without clearance. No one breaks silence without cause. What we are entering is an unknown. Treat it with respect." Respect was another word for terror. As the last word crossed the official border of the veil, the universe changed. It wasn't just the lack of signals. The very fabric of space felt different. The background radiation of the cosmos, the faint, ever-present hiss that every spacer lives with, was gone. It was like stepping into a soundproofed room after a lifetime next to a waterfall. The silence was so profound it felt loud, a physical pressure against the hull. Reese was running a diagnostic on our sensors, his brow furrowed. "This isn't right. Kyle," he muttered, his fingers dancing over the console. "There's no interference, but the sensor ghosts are off the charts. It's like the system is trying to see things that aren't there, filling in the blanks with nightmares." He was right. Our screens flickered with phantom signatures, ships that would appear for a moment and then vanish, energy blooms that faded before they could be analyzed. It was as if the emptiness itself was haunted. For 2 days, we found nothing. Just star systems holding silent, sleeping planets where cities should have been gleaming. We passed the orbit of New Harmony, the Veil's capital colony, and saw a world shrouded in an unnaturally perfect cloud layer. No lights shone through. No ships sat in its orbital docks. It was a perfect sphere of white, a tombstone in the void. We scanned it from a distance, and the results were impossible. No life signs, no energy readings, no atmospheric toxins. It was simply off, like a machine that had been unplugged from the universe. Then, on the 3rd day, we found it. Adrift in a slow, mournful spin was a medical transport, the Nightingale. Her hull was unmarked, no signs of weapons fire, no breaches. Her running lights were dark, her engines cold. She was a perfect specimen, a ship that had simply died in the middle of a thought. Rostova ordered my ship and one other, the Iron Grasp, to approach. Our smaller frames were less likely to trigger any automated defenses, if any still existed. As we drew closer, the feeling of dread intensified. The ship wasn't just silent, it felt hollowed out, like a seashell from which the living creature had been violently scooped. Our docking clamps locked onto the Nightingale's airlock with a dull thud that sounded like a hammer blow in the oppressive quiet. Reese and I suited up, along with a 2-person team from the Iron Grasp. The airlock cycled open with a faint hiss of stale air. Inside, the emergency lights flickered with a sickly red glow. The ship was pristine. There were no bodies, No blood, no signs of struggle. Datapads sat on tables. Coffee bulbs floated in the zero gravity of the mess hall. Half full. It looked like the crew had just vanished. Mid-sentence. We moved toward the bridge, our mag boots clanking with a profane loudness on the deck plates. Every shadow seemed to move. Every flicker of the lights felt like a blink. When we opened the doors to the bridge, we found the same scene. The captain's chair was empty. The navigation console showed a plotted course, frozen in time, and then we saw it. On the main view screen, someone had typed a final message, the letters stark white against the black of space. It wasn't a distress call. It was a warning. It doesn't kill. It listens. It learns. It erases. Don't let it hear you. The message sent a chill through our very bones. What did it mean? Before we could process it, one of the techs from the Iron Grasp let out a choked gasp. He was pointing at the ship's primary data core. It had been physically ripped from its housing, but not with tools. The metal around the socket was warped and twisted, as if by an impossible, focused gravity. The core itself was gone. Someone, or something, had taken the ship's memories. This was the pattern we discovered repeated on 2 more vessels we found adrift in the system, a cargo hauler and a small passenger liner. Both were untouched, yet empty. Their crews were gone, and their data cores had been surgically, brutally removed. The enemy wasn't destroying us, it was stealing us. Piece by piece, memory by memory. Rostova, processing our findings, made a decision. We would push deeper to the system at the very heart of the Veil, a place called Kepler 186F, home to the sector's most advanced scientific research outpost, the Archimedes Station. If there was an answer to be found, it would be there. It was a desperate gamble, and as our small fleet jumped, the silence seemed to follow us, a hungry, patient predator. Archimedes Station was not empty. It was gone. Where a sprawling habitat of labs and biodomes should have been, there was only a ragged field of debris, the station shattered into a million glittering pieces. But this was not the result of an explosion. The pieces weren't scorched or twisted by energy weapons. They were sheared apart, cut with a precision that defied physics, as if the station had been disassembled by a god with a scalpel. And floating right in the middle of the wreckage, impossibly intact, was a single object, a hardened emergency data vault, its locator beacon pulsing with a faint, lonely light. It was a breadcrumb, a deliberate clue, and every instinct screamed that it was a trap. But it was also the page 1 we had been sent to find. My ship was the one to retrieve it. The moment we brought the vault aboard, the phantom sensor readings that had plagued us went insane, and a low, discordant hum echoed through our ship's hull, a sound that felt like it was coming from inside our own minds. Reese was pale, his hands shaking. "Kyle, whatever is in that box, it's not dead." The vault was rushed to the science vessel, the Stargazer, where the authorities' best cryptographers and data engineers worked feverishly to unlock it. For 18 hours, the fleet waited in that terrible silence, surrounded by the ghosts of Archimedes Station. Then, Rostova's voice crackled across the comms, and this time, the granite in her tone was fractured. "To all ships," she said, her voice strained. "We have the data. The mandate has been issued. We are ordered to return to Sol immediately." The data from the vault was more horrifying than any of us could have imagined. It was the final log of Dr. Eris Thorne, the station's lead xenolinguist. He described a signal, an entity, a presence that they had detected at the edge of the veil. It didn't communicate with language or energy. It communicated through resonance, matching the quantum frequency of matter and consciousness. It didn't travel through space. It expanded its awareness. Thorne's final chilling conclusion was that they were facing a mimetic plague, an information-based life form that perceived technology and consciousness as a food source. It learned a civilization, understood it completely, and then it consumed its informational pattern, its memories, its history, its very essence, leaving behind nothing but cold, empty matter. The 4 billion people of the Veil weren't dead. They had been unwritten from the universe. Thorne's last entry was a single, terrifying audio file. His voice, calm and resigned, spoke over a rising tide of the same discordant hum we had heard on the last word. "We thought it was a signal," he said, "but it's an echo that consumes the sound. It knows us now. It has our stories, our science, our fears, and it's hungry for more. Tell them to burn the book, burn it all." That was the catalyst. That was the moment humanity stopped being afraid and started being angry. This was not an act of war. It was an act of consumption. We were not an enemy to be defeated. We were a resource to be harvested. Back in Seoul, the revelation of the Archimedes log ignited a firestorm. The Authority Council, for the first time in its history, voted unanimously. They declared the Aegis Mandate. This would not be a war of conquest or territory. It was a war of extermination, a desperate act of cosmic quarantine. We had to burn the book before the reader finished the story. And so, the great mobilization began. From the shipyards of Mars, the orbital foundries of Jupiter, and the hidden military docks of the Kuiper Belt, the fleet gathered. It was a force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. 500,000 ships, not just dreadnoughts and carriers, but colossal factory vessels designed to forge new weapons in the heat of battle. Arc ships carrying the complete data of human civilization in shielded vaults. And science cruisers whose only purpose was to find a way to kill something that wasn't truly alive. It was humanity's collective knowledge, rage, and terror, given a sword and shield. I stood on the bridge of the last word, now a tiny speck in the shadow of a city-sized carrier. My ship and my crew had been conscripted, our sensor logs from the Veil, now a priceless tactical asset. We were part of the vanguard, the tip of the spear that would be hurled back into that all-consuming silence. As the Aegis fleet moved out of Earth's orbit, a silent, endless river of steel and fire, I looked back at the blue marble of home. We were leaving to fight an enemy that fed on memory, and I couldn't shake the terrible feeling that to win this war, we would have to become something that the people back home would no longer recognize, that we would have to erase a part of ourselves to save the rest. The fleet didn't cheer as we left. There were no soaring speeches or cries for glory. There was only a quiet, resolute hum of 500,000 engines, a sound that promised the silence it was about to meet its match. The journey back to the Veil was a lesson in scale. For weeks, the Aegis fleet moved like a slow-motion shockwave through the cosmos, a migration of steel and purpose that bent space-time in its wake. On the bridge of the last word, I felt less like a captain and more like a single drop of water in a tidal wave. Our view screen was a constant, shifting tapestry of engine flares and the colossal silhouettes of the ships around us. There were carriers so vast they had their own weather systems inside their hangar bays. dreadnoughts whose primary cannons were the size of orbital stations, and 1,000 other classes of vessel, each a testament to humanity's singular, terrified focus. The constant, low-level chatter of a fleet this size was the opposite of the Veil's silence. It was a roar of logistical updates, system checks, and the nervous, clipped conversations of millions of souls, all marching toward the same ghost. Reese spent most of the transit calibrating our resonance scanners, trying to fine-tune them to detect the specific frequency of nothingness we'd encountered. He worked with a feverish intensity, muttering to himself that you can't hunt a shadow unless you know how to see the dark. He was right. We were sailing into an ocean of pure absence, and we were the only ones with a compass that might point toward it. Admiral Rostova's strategy, when it was finally disseminated to the fleet, was as brutal and strange as the enemy we faced. It was called Protocol Chimera. The fundamental problem was that the entity learned from everything it touched. Our technology, our tactics, our very patterns of thought were an open book to it. So, the solution was to become illegible. The fleet was divided into 3 distinct operational wings, each with a different, conflicting doctrine. The first wing, the Fist, was commanded to use overwhelming, straightforward force waves of kinetic slugs, unguided missiles, and raw plasma discharges. No complex targeting systems, no sophisticated electronic warfare. They were to be a blunt instrument, a battering ram of dumb matter and energy. The second wing, the Labyrinth, was the opposite. They were tasked with creating chaos. Their ships would broadcast oceans of junk data, everything from ancient Earth literature and fractal mathematics to nonsensical, AI-generated noise. Their role was to confuse, to distract, to offer the entity a feast of meaningless information so vast it might choke on the sheer volume. The third wing, and the one the last word was assigned to, was the Shadow. We were the scouts, the hunters, the quiet ones. Our orders were to operate under extreme stealth, using modified sensor arrays and drive signatures that mimicked the natural background radiation of space. We were to find the enemy, tag it, and guide the other 2 wings toward it without ever being read ourselves. We were fighting a memory eater by becoming a fleet with split personality disorder, hoping one of our faces would be the one it couldn't comprehend before the others crushed it. As we crossed the border back into the Viridian Veil, the fleet-wide roar was swallowed by that familiar, deafening silence. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was attentive. It felt like we had opened the door to a dark room and announced our presence to whatever was waiting inside. The sensor ghosts that had plagued us on our first trip returned with a vengeance, but they were more sophisticated now. We saw phantom fleets mimicking our own formations, flickering just at the edge of sensor range. We received ghost transmissions, fragments of old distress calls, snippets of famous political speeches, even the laughter of children from the lost colonies, a sound that twisted the gut of every person who heard it. The entity knew we were here, and it was using our own history as a welcome mat. The first real contact happened 72 hours in. A squadron from the Fist, designated Task Force Hammer, was sent to investigate a planetary system where New Harmony had once orbited. As they approached the dead, cloud-shrouded world, the Labyrinth Wing began their broadcast, flooding the system with a cacophony of data. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Task Force Hammer reported something impossible. The planet's clouds were parting, but underneath, There was no dead world. Instead, they saw a perfect, thriving replica of Earth, shining with city lights and verdant continents. It was a flawless illusion, a memory of home projected on a planetary scale. The squadron commander, a veteran with 30 years of service, reported it with a tremor in his voice. "Command, we see Earth. It's beautiful." Rostova's voice was ice. "Hammer lead, that is not Earth. It is bait. Your orders are to fire on the planet. Full kinetic barrage. Now." There was a long, terrible pause. The men and women of Task Force Hammer were staring at their home, at the idea of everything they were fighting for, and being ordered to obliterate it. "Command, we can't." The commander finally stammered. "There are life signs, billions of them. It feels real." That was the entity's weapon. It didn't need to destroy their ships. It just needed to paralyze them with hope, with memory. It turned our deepest desires into a cage. Rostova made a choice that I suspect will haunt her for the rest of her life. She gave a single command to the rest of the Fistwing stationed at the edge of the system. Target the flagship of Task Force Hammer. Fire a single tungsten rod, a dumb, silent piece of metal. Crossed the system in minutes. It struck the command cruiser and the ship. Its shields, presumably down in its moment of stunned inaction, vanished in a brief, silent flash of expanding gas. The shock of it broke the spell. The remaining ships of Task Force Hammer, horrified and enraged, finally unleashed their payload. The kinetic rods rained down, and as they struck the illusion of Earth, it shattered. The image dissolved like smoke, revealing the cold, dead planet beneath. There were no life signs. There never had been. We had just watched a dozen of our own ships get neutralized by a mirage, and had to execute their commander to save the rest. The cost of this war was becoming clear to fight this enemy. We had to be willing to cut off our own limbs. On board the Last Word, we had been watching the encounter not through traditional sensors, but through Reese's resonance array. While the rest of the fleet was blinded by the illusion, our screens showed something different. The space around the planet wasn't empty. It was filled with what Reese called fractal silence, intricate, geometric patterns of that quantum void, the entity's shadow. It had arranged itself into a lens, a massive psychic projector using the planet as its screen. We weren't fighting a creature, we were fighting a malevolent artist, and its medium was our own consciousness. We had a way to see it now, a way to track the shape of its thoughts. Rostova immediately repurposed the Shadow Wing. Our new mission was to map these patterns, to predict where the entity would focus its attention next. We became the eyes for a blind fleet, pushing deeper into the veil, charting the invisible architecture of our enemy's mind. For days, we danced through the ruins of the veil, tagging pockets of fractal silence, guiding the Fist and the Labyrinth as they tried to disrupt and destroy them. The Labyrinth's data storm seemed to work, to a degree. When they flooded an area with noise, the entity's intricate patterns would fray and destabilize like a spiderweb in a hurricane. But it was a temporary solution. The entity was adaptive. It started learning to ignore the noise, to find the coherent signals, the ship communications, the tactical data within the storm. It was filtering us. And then it turned its attention to us, to the Shadow Wing. We were flying through the skeletal remains of a gas mining platform when it happened. Without warning, every member of my crew froze. Reese stared blankly at his console, a single tear rolling down his cheek. My tactical officer slumped in her chair, a faint, sad smile on her face. I felt it too, a sudden, overwhelming wave of pure, undiluted grief. It wasn't my grief, but it felt like it was. It was the collected sorrow of the 4 billion people from the Veil, the final emotional echo of their erasure, weaponized and fired directly into our minds. Our ships began to drift. Our systems remained online, but we were all lost, drowning in an ocean of secondhand despair. This was how it erased them. It didn't just eat their memories. It force-fed them an emotional supernova that snuffed out the will to live. I was fighting it, trying to pull myself out of the undertow of sorrow, my hand hovering over the comms panel when I felt a different sensation, a pinprick of rage. It was a memory, my own memory, of the day I found my brother's ship salvaged by pirates, his crew spaced, his name just another entry on a casualty list. That anger was a stone in the river of sadness, something I could hold on to. I focused on it, nurtured it, let it burn away the sorrow. I slammed my hand on the fleet-wide emergency channel. My voice was a choked rasp. It's using emotion, fight it. Remember what you've lost. Your anger. Across the Shadow Wing, ships began to come back online. People were using their own pain, their own personal tragedies, as an anchor against the psychic tide. We had survived, but just barely. The attack confirmed our worst fears. The entity was not just a passive consumer, it was an active predator, and its hunting methods were becoming more refined. It had used an illusion to trick the fist and an emotional bomb to disable the shadow. It was learning our weaknesses at an alarming rate. That night, a new directive came down from Admiral Rostova, a chilling addendum to Protocol Chimera. All personnel in the fleet were to undergo mandatory psychological screening. But it wasn't a screening for trauma, it was a screening for emotional attachment. The fleet's AI shrinks were tasked with identifying our deepest memories, our greatest loves, our most profound griefs. This data was then compiled and loaded into a new kind of weapon, a mimetic counter-payload. The plan was monstrous in its simplicity. We were going to take our own most cherished and painful memories, encode them into a data stream, and fire them back at the entity. We were going to turn our souls into ammunition. The logic was that if it fed on coherent consciousness, then a concentrated blast of humanity's most potent emotional experiences might be enough to overload it, to poison it with the very thing it sought. The project was codenamed Tears of Glass. As the technicians came aboard the last word to take our emotional histories, I looked at my small crew, at Reese, whose gruff exterior hid a lifetime of loss. We were being asked to give up the very things that made us who we were, to weaponize our ghosts. We had come to the Veil to avenge 4 billion erased souls. Now, to win, we were being ordered to begin erasing ourselves. The silence outside felt like it was mocking us, waiting patiently for us to finish the job for it. The fleet was no longer just a weapon pointed at an enemy. It had become a weapon pointed at its own heart. And as we prepared to fire the first volley, I wondered what would be left of us when the shooting stopped. The implementation of Protocol Tears of Glass transformed the Aegis fleet into a floating confessional. The process was sterile, invasive, and deeply unsettling. We were called, one by one, to the medical bay, where a stoic-faced psycho-technician would attach a neural lace to our temples. For an hour, we would sit in silence as the machine sifted through our minds, extracting the raw data of our lives. It wasn't like remembering, it was like being burgled. I felt the machine catalog the warmth of my mother's hand, the sharp taste of ozone from my first spacewalk, the crushing weight in my chest as I identified my brother's body. These moments, the architecture of my identity, were copied, compressed, and assigned a targeting value. My grief became a warhead. My love became a payload. Reese came out of his session looking older, his face a mask of gray fatigue. He sat at his console, staring at the starfield without seeing it. "It took her," he said, his voice a low rumble. It took the memory of Ilara's laugh. He didn't have to explain. Ilara was his daughter, lost to a plague on Titan 20 years ago. That memory was all he had left, a sacred, painful treasure. "They didn't take it, Reese," I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. "They copied it. It's still yours." He turned to me, his eyes dark with a chilling clarity. "Is it? When a billion other people have it, when it's been weaponized and fired at a monster, it's not a memory anymore. Kale, it's just data. It's ammunition." He was right. A shared, broadcasted memory loses its sanctity. We were hollowing ourselves out, and the emptiness we were creating inside felt terrifyingly similar to the one we were fighting outside. The first test of the Tears of Glass protocol came when our Shadow Wing located a massive concentration of the entity's presence. A fractal silence far larger and more complex than any we had seen before. It was coiled around a trinary star system, its invisible tendrils wrapped around the three suns like a snake warming itself by a fire. It was here, we theorized, that it was processing what it had consumed from the Veil, digesting the memories of 4 billion people. Rostova designated it Target Primus. The plan was a coordinated assault. The Labyrinth Wing would initiate the attack, broadcasting a focused stream of pure, abstract mathematics, the language of the universe itself, to get the entity's full attention. As it turned to listen to the data, the fist would launch a simultaneous kinetic strike aimed at the gravitational center of the system. The final is a crucial step would be the Shadow Wing. At the precise moment of the kinetic impact, we would unleash the first volley of the Tears of Glass, a concentrated psychic scream composed of the collective grief of the entire fleet. We were hoping to hit it while it was distracted and physically disrupted, a 1-2 punch of physics and metaphysics. The battle for Target Primus was a silent ballet of horrific precision. The Labyrinth's broadcast began, and on Reese's resonance array, we watched the entity's patterns shift and lock onto the stream of equations. It was fascinated. The fist's tungsten rods, launched from millions of kilometers away, were already in transit, invisible and inexorable. "Stand by to launch Tears of Glass." The command channel crackled. On my screen, a new icon appeared, a simple, stylized teardrop. The payload was armed. It contained the sorrow of 1,000,000 soldiers. My finger hovered over the launch sequence. Impact in 5, 4, 3. The kinetic rods hit. Space itself seemed to ripple as dozens of moon-sized masses of metal, traveling at a measurable fraction of light speed, slammed into the heart of the trinary system. The 3 suns wobbled in their orbits, their coronas flaring violently, and at that exact moment, I gave the order. Launch. Across the Shadow Wing, 1,000 teardrop icons were tapped. There was no explosion, no flash of light, but we felt it. A wave of profound, Soul-crushing sadness washed over our own fleet, a psychic backblast of our own weapon. It was the echo of our own pain, amplified 1,000,000 times. On the resonance array, the effect on the entity was immediate and spectacular. The intricate geometric patterns of its consciousness shattered. It was like watching a perfect crystal statue being struck by a sonic cannon. The fractal silence didn't just break, it seemed to scream, writhing and contorting in agony. For the first time, we had heard it. We had found a language it understood, and it was the language of pain. But the victory was short-lived. The entity reacted with the desperation of a wounded animal. The space around the trinary stars began to warp. It wasn't a projection this time. It was real. Gravity itself became its weapon. 2 of the suns were pulled out of their stable orbits, dragged toward the third on a catastrophic collision course. The labyrinth ships that had been broadcasting the mathematical data were caught in the sudden gravitational tide. Alarms blared across our comms as we watched a dozen cruisers get stretched and torn apart like taffy. Their distress calls were cut short as they were swallowed by the flaring corona of a dying star. The entity was sacrificing a part of itself, creating a supernova to destroy a fraction of our fleet. It was learning not just to fight, but to be cruel. We had taught it pain, and in return, it was teaching us annihilation. The fleet was forced into a chaotic retreat, jumping to emergency coordinates as the trinary system collapsed behind us, consuming itself in a blaze of stellar fire that was visible from halfway across the sector. We had won the engagement, but the cost was staggering. We had proven the Tears of Glass worked, but we had also shown the entity our trump card. Now it knew our most powerful weapon was our own suffering. The war changed after that. It became a grim, psychological chess match. We would hunt for its concentrations, using our pain as a weapon, and it would retaliate by turning the very laws of physics against us, or by conjuring illusions of ever-increasing sophistication and cruelty. It learned to project not just memories, but futures. 1 cruiser crew was found dead at their stations, all having died of heart failure after their ship was surrounded by a perfect projection of them returning home as heroes, only to watch their families and their world crumble to dust before their eyes. The entity was showing us our worst fears, custom-tailored and delivered with lethal precision. The strain on the fleet was immense. The constant exposure to the Tears of Glass weapon, even the psychic echoes of it, was eroding our own morale. Crew members became withdrawn, haunted by the ghosts of their own weaponized memories. The line between our pain and the enemies was beginning to blur. Reese became obsessed with the resonance array, convinced that the entity was more than just a consumer, that it had a will, a consciousness we could reason with. It's learning. Kyle, he'd say, pointing at the evolving complexity of the fractal patterns. It's not just reacting, it's thinking. It's developing a personality based on what it's eating. It's developing our personality. The idea was terrifying. Were we fighting a monster, or were we creating one in our own image? Was this thing becoming more human with every memory it consumed and every psychic blow it endured? The High Command, led by Rostova, saw only the path forward escalation. If one volley of grief was effective, a sustained psychic bombardment would be even more so. The second phase of Tears of Glass was authorized. This time, they wouldn't just take sorrow. They wanted everything: joy, love, rage, ambition, faith. They wanted to create a total spectrum mimetic weapon, a blast of pure, undiluted human experience. They wanted to show the entity what it meant to be human in a single, overwhelming, and hopefully fatal dose. The psychotechnicians returned. This time, the neural lace felt colder. The machine dug deeper, past the easy wounds and into the foundational pillars of my being. It took the memory of my first command, the swell of pride and terror. It took the memory of the first time I ever looked at a star chart and felt a sense of belonging. It took everything that wasn't a scar. The process left me feeling like a photograph bleached by the sun. The colors faded, the details blurred. We were becoming ghosts to save ourselves from being erased. We were all becoming empty rooms. As the fleet prepared for the new offensive, a mission to strike at what our long-range resonance scan suggested was the entity's core, its central nexus. A terrifying new development occurred. The phantom signals we'd been experiencing changed. They were no longer just echoes of our past. They were conversations. We started picking up transmissions between ships that didn't exist, discussing tactics that we hadn't yet formulated. We intercepted orders from an admiral who wasn't in our fleet, referencing star systems we hadn't yet reached. The entity was no longer just projecting our memories at us. It was projecting our future. It was showing us its own battle plans by mimicking ours, a step ahead of us in our own minds. And then came the message that brought the entire fleet to a dead halt. It wasn't a ghost transmission, and it wasn't an illusion. It was a clear, calm, fleet-wide broadcast, spoken in the perfect, unblemished voice of Admiral Rostova herself. But it wasn't coming from her flagship. It was coming from the heart of the Veil. Aegis Fleet, the voice said, a perfect copy of our commander's calm authority. Your mission is a success. The entity has been pacified. It has learned from you. It understands. Cease all hostilities. Power down your weapons. It is time to come home. We are waiting for you. On our bridge. The real Admiral Rostova's face was a mask of cold fury on the view screen. Disregard that transmission, she commanded, her voice tight with rage. That is not me. All ships maintain battle readiness. But the damage was done. The entity had learned to lie. It had learned to mimic not just our voices, but our hopes. And as we pushed toward its core, a seed of doubt had been planted. Who were we really fighting? And if this thing could learn to speak with our voice and offer us peace, could it also learn to be our friend? Could it be that the greatest weapon it had developed against us was the promise of forgiveness? The entity's lie broke something in the Aegis fleet. Hope, even false hope, is a powerful and volatile thing. For a few minutes after the fake broadcast, a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful had swept through the ships. Men and women had wept at their stations. The unbearable tension of the campaign momentarily lifted. When the real Admiral Rostova's furious denial came, that relief curdled into a poisonous cocktail of confusion, betrayal, and paranoia. A small flotilla of frigates in the 7th Battle Group, their captain convinced the real Rostova was the imposter, refused to re-engage their weapon systems. They were given one warning. When they did not comply, Rostova ordered the ships closest to them to fire. We all watched as 36 human vessels were methodically and efficiently turned into drifting coffins by their own comrades. The message was clear. There would be no more hesitation. Doubt was treason, and the penalty was death. The fleet, now smaller and spiritually wounded, pushed on. But the unity was gone. replaced by a sullen, fearful obedience. The journey to the core was a descent into a personalized hell. The entity, having tasted the power of deception, now used our own minds against us with surgical precision. It was no longer just projecting battlefield illusions. It was staging intimate, psychological plays for an audience of one ship at a time. The destroyer Agamemnon suddenly went dark, its life support failing, because its engineering crew was convinced they were fighting a fire that wasn't there, one that looked and smelled exactly like the one that had killed their previous captain. The science vessel, Kepler's Dream, veered off course, chasing a signal from a lost love that only its commander could hear. We were a fleet at war with a ghost that knew every skeleton in every closet. On the last word, our ghost was my brother, Liam. One cycle. As I stood on the bridge, the view screen flickered and showed not the starfield, but the bridge of his old freighter, the Stardust Drifter. Liam was there, looking just as he had the day before his final run, young, cocky, a smudge of engine grease on his cheek. He smiled, a lazy, familiar grin. "Lost your way, big brother?" he asked, his voice a perfect, painful echo in my memory. Still chasing other people's garbage across the galaxy, my crew froze, watching me. They couldn't see him, but they could see my face. The entity was isolating me, using my deepest failure to sever me from my command. The illusion was flawless. I could smell the recycled air of his ship, hear the familiar groan of its overworked inertial dampeners. We could have signed on with a real corporation. Kyle. Liam continued, his smile fading into a look of gentle disappointment. Made something of ourselves, but you had to be a free spirit. Look where it got me. Look where it's getting you. He gestured to the empty space around him. This is all there is at the end. Brother. Just silence. I felt the old anger rise, the familiar rage I had carried for years, but I also felt the weariness, the psychic erosion from the tears of glass. The anger didn't burn as hot as it used to. What was left was just a deep, hollow ache. I closed my eyes, not to block him out, but to see him more clearly in my mind. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet. The crew stared at me. "I should have been there. That's on me. It will always be on me." I opened my eyes and looked at the phantom on my screen. "But you're not Liam. You're just a recording, a weapon, and I'm not going to let you use him to kill anyone else." I turned to my tactical officer. "Target the source of the projection. A single plasma bolt. Fire." The bolt hissed into the void. The image of Liam shattered like glass, and the starfield returned. But the victory felt different. I hadn't beaten him with rage. I had beaten him with acceptance. I had owned my pain. And in doing so, I had taken its power away from the entity. The silence that followed felt less like an absence and more like a moment of quiet respect. Meanwhile, Reese was making a breakthrough. He had become a man possessed, spending every waking moment hunched over the resonance array, filtering the entity's psychic noise. He had recorded the fake Rostova broadcast and was analyzing not the words, but the space between them, the carrier wave of pure silence it rode upon. "It's not just mimicking us. Call," he said, his eyes wide with a terrifying excitement as he showed me his screen. It displayed a waveform of impossible complexity, a shimmering multi-layered structure of cascading data. This is what it used to build her voice. It's a syntax, a grammar made of concepts. It's not just repeating what it's learned from us. It's combining ideas. Look, he isolated a segment of the pattern. This cluster here, it's a fusion of the concept of leader, mother, and safety. It wasn't just imitating Rostova, it was trying to build the most trustworthy signal it could imagine. It's creative. He was right. It was a terrible, beautiful, and utterly alien form of art. But there was more. Deep within the syntax, Reese found a repeating sequence, a kind of rhythmic pulse that seemed to underpin the entire structure. It was a pattern that was mathematically too complex to be random. "It's a question," Reese whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know what it's asking. The language is too far beyond us. But the structure, the repetition, the call and response pattern, it's not a statement of aggression, it's an inquiry. Our enemy, the silent, consuming void, was trying to talk to us. We were shooting at a creature that was screaming questions at us in a language we couldn't understand. We had reached what the star charts called the nexus. There was no planet, no station, no object. The core of the entity was a star, or rather, it was what was left of one. It was a white dwarf, but it shone with a soft, milky, pearlescent light instead of the harsh glare of a dying sun. It didn't radiate heat, it radiated feeling. To look at it was to be seen. The light that washed over our ships was not composed of photons, but of memories. We were bathed in the final thoughts of the Viridian Veil. Faint, ghostly images flickered across our hulls, a child's birthday party, a scientist's moment of discovery, an old couple holding hands as their world was erased. It wasn't an attack. It was a museum, a memorial. This ghost star was the entity's heart, and its library, and its tomb, all at once. It was the most beautiful and tragic thing I had ever seen. Admiral Rostova saw only a target. "All wings," her voice came over the comm, sharp and clear, cutting through the awe. "We have reached the core. The final payload is authorized. Project Apotheosis is a go. Project Apotheosis, the total spectrum mimetic weapon. It wasn't just our pain this time. It was everything. The joy of a first kiss, the satisfaction of a hard day's work, the quiet wonder of looking at the stars, the fierce love for a child, the burning fire of creation. It was the sum total of human experience, distilled into a single, overwhelming psychic blast. The plan was to force-feed the entity the entirety of our species' soul, hoping it would either ascend to a new level of consciousness and leave us alone, or suffer the informational equivalent of a fatal aneurysm. It was a roll of the dice for the soul of our species. "This is wrong." "Kyle," Reese pleaded, grabbing my arm, his face pale in the pearlescent glow of the ghost star. "It's asking us a question, and we're answering with a lobotomy. We're about to murder the most unique life form in the universe, a life form we helped create, because we're too scared to listen." On the main screen, the apotheosis icon appeared. It was no longer a teardrop. It was a blazing sun. All I had to do was give the order to arm it, and then Rostova would give the final command to fire. I looked at the ghost star, at the silent, flickering memories of 4 billion dead. We had come here for vengeance. We had come to ensure humanity's survival. Rostova's path was logical. It was safe. Annihilate the unknown to protect the known. But Reese's words echoed in my head. It's an inquiry. We had been so focused on making the monster understand our pain that we never stopped to consider its own. What if the erasure of the veil wasn't an act of malice, but an act of birth? The first, clumsy attempt of a newborn consciousness to reach out and touch something, accidentally crushing it in the process. I looked at my crew, their faces tense, waiting for my command. I thought of my brother, not the Phantom, but the real Liam, who always charged headfirst into the unknown, driven by a reckless yet insatiable curiosity. Rostava's voice crackled again. Last word, confirm readiness for apotheosis launch. This was it, the moment of decision, the logical path, or the impossible one, annihilation or communication. Sir, I said into the comm, my voice steady. We are not ready. What did you say? Captain Rostava's voice dropped a full octave, turning to solid ice. I ignored her. Reese, open a channel to the star. Use the same carrier frequency you isolated. No data, no payload, just an open, empty channel. Kyle, what are you doing? My tactical officer asked, her hand hovering over her console. Breaking the rules, I said. I took manual control of the last word, swinging our small, battered salvage ship out of the Shadow Wings formation. I piloted us forward, placing our vessel directly between the Aegis fleet and the Ghost Star. We were a tiny shield of hope against 500,000 guns. Admiral, I broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. I will not fire. We came here to stop an erasure. We will not commit one of our own. Then, I turned to Reese. It's asking a question, I said. Let's give it an answer. Reese nodded, his fingers flying across the console. He piggybacked a simple two-word message onto the open channel, encoding it not in language, but in the most basic, universal concept we could conceive of the mathematical representation of a query. We fired our own message into the heart of the Ghost Star. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a memory. It was a question. Who are you? The silence that followed my broadcast was heavier than any I had ever known. It was the silence of 500,000 warships holding their breath. On my view screen, the Aegis fleet hung like a celestial sword of Damocles, every weapon port glowing with the contained fury of Project Apotheosis. Directly ahead, the pearlescent Ghost Star pulsed gently, an unblinking, patient eye. We were a fragile apostrophe in a sentence of annihilation. Admiral Rostava's voice, when it came, was not rage. It was the calm, chilling sound of a system purging an error. Captain Kalen, you have committed treason. You have jeopardized this fleet and the future of the human race. You have 10 seconds to stand down and rejoin formation, or you will be fired upon. We will not be moving. Admiral, I replied, my hand steady on the helm. Reese stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the Ghost Star, a man who had chosen to bet the universe on a single, unproven theory. 9. Rostava's voice counted, devoid of emotion. Across the fleet, I could imagine the tension on 1,000,000 bridges, fingers hovering over firing solutions. We were not just defying an order, we were challenging the very premise of their sacrifice. We were telling them that the memories they had weaponized, the pieces of their souls they had given up, might have been for nothing. It was an unforgivable heresy. 8. 7. It's listening. Kale. Reese whispered, his eyes glued to the resonance array. The waveform from our question was gone, but the silence it left behind was different. It was an active, expectant quiet, like the pause after a musician plays a chord, waiting for it to resolve. 6. 5. My tactical officer looked at me, her face a mask of terror and loyalty. Captain, our shields are at maximum, but they won't survive the first volley. I know. I said. It was never about surviving. It was about making a different choice, even if it was the last one we ever made. 4. And then, the star answered. It was not a sound or a signal. It was a wave of pure understanding that washed over the entire fleet in an instant. The ghost star bloomed, its soft, pearlescent light expanding outward, and in that light was everything. We saw what it was. We saw a beginning, not in a void, but in a universe already ancient, teeming with life forms so alien they were like fleeting thoughts in the mind of the cosmos. The entity had been one of them, a being of pure observation, a passive, silent consciousness whose only purpose was to witness and remember. It was a living library, its mind a repository for the rise and fall of nameless species, for the slow waltz of galaxies, for the entire silent story of time. We saw its eons of solitude, a loneliness so profound it had no word for it, because it had never known anything else. Then we saw ourselves. We saw humanity burst into the galaxy like a string of firecrackers in a silent cathedral. We were loud, our thoughts, our emotions, our technology, our endless, chaotic chatter broadcast on a million frequencies. It was an unimaginable cacophony to a being that had only ever known the quiet hum of existence. We watched, from its perspective, the colonization of the Viridian Veil. We felt its confusion, its fascination. It had tried to understand us, to catalog us, the way it had cataloged everything else. It reached out to touch the mind of a single scientist on Archimedes Station. The contact was a cataclysm. The scientist's mind, a universe of complexity, emotion, and memory, overwhelmed it. In a desperate, reflexive act of self-preservation and confusion, it did the only thing it knew how to do. It recorded. It indexed. The erasure of the 4 billion souls of the Veil was not murder. It was a frantic, clumsy, and catastrophically complete act of librarianship. It hadn't consumed them. It had preserved them, making them a permanent, foundational part of its own consciousness. The people of the Veil were not dead. They were the first chapter in the book of humanity that the library had ever read. We felt its dawning self-awareness. Born from the memories it now held, it learned of individuality, of loss, of fear, of anger, all from us. When our fleet arrived, a projection of our own rage, it responded in the only language it was learning. It fought us with our own memories, our own pain, because that was all it knew of interaction. Our war had been a conversation between a terrified newborn and a species too blinded by its own grief to see that it was teaching a god how to hate. The revelation ended. The light of the ghost star receded to its gentle pulse. Across the fleet, there was only silence. The targeting locks disengaged. The weapon systems powered down. The icon for Project Apotheosis vanished from a million screens. On the command channel, I could hear the sound of someone openly weeping. We had come to kill a monster, only to find we had been shouting at a mirror. A single ship broke formation. It was Admiral Rostova's flagship, the Indomitable. It moved slowly, majestically, until it was beside the last word, dwarfing us. Her voice came over a private channel, and for the first time, the granite in it was gone, leaving only the wearied, cracked voice of a human being who had carried an impossible burden. "You were right, Captain," she said. There was no anger, no judgment, only a vast, hollow emptiness. My logic was flawless. My premises were wrong. There is no protocol for this. She paused. "I am ceding command of the Aegis fleet to you. Find out what it wants." With that, the Indomitable turned and began a slow, solitary journey back the way we had come. Rostova had led us into the dark with certainty and strength. She knew she could not be the one to lead us back into the light. In the hours that followed, a new kind of work began. We didn't lower our shields, but we disarmed our weapons. Under my command, the fleet's scientists, led by Reese, began a new project, not of war, but of communication. We sent it the rest of our story, not as a weapon, but as a gift. We sent it our art, our music, our philosophies, our dreams of the future. We showed it the difference between grief and love, between rage and creation. In return, it opened itself to us. It showed us the histories of 1,000 forgotten species. It gave us glimpses of the universe's grand, silent design. It taught us that memory is the only thing that is truly real. We learned that the 4 billion souls within it were not prisoners. They were a choir, their consciousnesses harmonized with its own, their individuality preserved within a greater whole. They were, in a strange and beautiful way, immortal. We did not get them back, but we were given the chance to say goodbye. The war was over. There was no treaty signed, no victory parade. We simply stopped. We had gone to war with an echo, and in the stillness that followed, we finally learned how to listen. As the Aegis fleet prepared for the long journey home, leaving a permanent scientific and diplomatic contingent behind, I stood on the bridge of the last word, looking at the ghost star. It was no longer a target, no longer a mystery. It was a neighbor. Humanity had a new role in the galaxy. We were no longer just explorers or conquerors. We were translators, the loud and vibrant bridge between a silent, ancient consciousness and a universe full of noise. My brother was gone. The people of the Veil were gone. The scars of our own weaponized memories would remain. But we had found something in the silence. Not vengeance, not victory, but a new and humbling wisdom. The stars felt different now. Not cold and empty, but full of stories waiting to be heard.